Oaktober, which is something that Morton Arboretum and Chicago Region Trees Initiative put on every October. All right, so without further ado, let's have Judy Klem and Stephanie Walquist talk about the native gardens and parkways. Let me just say, Judy Klem is the executive director of the nonprofit Friends of the Oak Park Conservatory, and where she manages the organization that provides volunteers, education, programming, and grants to support the Oak Park Conservatory. She's also the president of the board for Oak Park Temple, providing vision and leadership to this thriving congregation. In the last 20 years in Oak Park, Judy has been able to pursue her passion for experimenting and learning about native plants in her home garden, at the Oak Park Temple's garden, and as a planner for the West Cook Wildlands Native Garden Walk for 5 years. And I had the pleasure of working with Judy, and it was a lot of fun. Stephanie Walquist is a co-founder of Wildlands West Cook. Butterflies taught her the importance of native plants and rethinking traditional garden maintenance over 20 years ago. Native bees are teaching her more lessons as well. She loves to keep learning by trying out new plants and identifying the many animals that come into the yard. And we are always grateful, that we have Stephanie continuing to provide leadership and be on our board, especially when she is so busy as a teacher at Oak Park and River High School, Oak Park and River Forest High School, which is not an easy job. And we're very proud of her. So anyway, take it away, Judy and Stephanie.
Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Judy Klem, and I am really excited to give this presentation with Stephanie, who I've admired for so many years. She's such an amazing and knowledgeable gardener, and it's such an honor to be here to present on Parkway gardening, something that I've been dabbling with, as Adrienne said, probably for about the last 15 years. And we decided to do this as a dual presentation today. So you'll hear from me on some of the slides, and you'll hear from Stephanie on some of the slides, and then together we'll share a few of the slides, but each of us will go through our Parkway Gardens and talk with you and show some of the plants and pictures as well. So without further ado, I'm gonna get us going here. Let's see if I click. Okay, so why Parkway gardening? Well, I think this attracted a lot of attention with this group in particular, because if you're a home gardener and you're curious about native plants, something happens to you and you start to think about, how can I get more native plants into my garden? And then you start to look at your space a little bit differently. And so I think for me, and probably for Stephanie as well, we were looking for a way to extend our gardens beyond just the small footprint of around our homes. And so using native plants to add garden space and just to try out something new became kind of the spark. And how do you go about doing that? So in doing so, over the past few years, there have been lots of lessons learned, and I really call myself an experimental gardener because there's a lot of trial and error. And so I think that's something to keep in mind as you go forward and think about gardening on your parkway. Another thing that I loved about venturing into the parkway is that as a busy human in this community and a parent of 4 kids, I was really looking for something that could kind of be self-sufficient in a sense. And so understanding and working with perennials versus just annuals, and how perennials behave and how they can duplicate and extend the garden further was really important to me. So I was looking for something that was low maintenance and that could be sustained year over year, and then I could just make little tweaks as we went along. Another thing that was important to me, and I think as somebody who's a native garden enthusiast, a native plant enthusiast, is thinking about my lawn space and the space around me on our parkway is something that could be a little bit more productive, or a lot more productive, depending on how much space you have. So thinking about gardening with a purpose was really important, and not just for beauty, but beauty plus purpose was really what I was looking to do. And of course, the chemicals have been off the lawn for ages, and we really just don't need chemicals on our lawn. It's not necessary, and there are so many healthier things that we can choose instead of putting chemicals on our lawn to try to get that lush green. And then another benefit of just working with natives, and Stephanie will probably talk more about this, is that not only are they productive for pollinators and attracting pollinators, but they also have many, many other benefits because of their deep roots. So let me advance us. Okay, speaking of, Stephanie.
So this is a pretty famous image, and Heidi Natura, she created it, and it's a really great illustration of the root systems that can happen. If you look over in the far left-hand corner, that's the Kentucky bluegrass that we use as our lawns. And some of these plants we wouldn't use on the Parkway. Obviously, they're too big, but you can see how extensive these root systems are. So it does a couple of things. It breaks up the soil, helps to enhance the permeability of the soil so that when we get rain, it goes down into the soil and not off onto the impermeable surfaces of the streets. Stores carbon. They also have symbiotic relationships with fungi, these fungal systems. So the fungi also do further things as in storing carbon as well, and even watering the plants when it gets dry and bringing nutrients to them. So this is one of the main benefits of having these native plants on something that would have been just this, like the roots and the bluegrass just go down about an inch or not even. So so it's much more self-sustaining. It's a much healthier, place instead of lawn grass. Next slide. All right, so if you're going to get started on this, you do need to think about it a little bit. It isn't just enough to stop mowing your lawn and think that what comes in is going to be native, because it won't. It'll be weeds. And you need to figure out like how big it is. We really recommend starting small, and then you can always expand. But if you start small, you have more control over what you're starting. You can keep the weeds down, manage the plants. If you need to edit them out, you're figuring out what works, what doesn't. So that's really, really important. So recommend when you're first planting, keep it small, doable for yourself. Make sure you really know your site conditions. Sometimes people think they'll look out, in March and it's a lot of sun. But that can change over the season if you have a Parkway tree and it leaves out. So you need to make sure that you're very clear about how many hours of sun it gets. And if you start with a young tree, which is what I had, I've been doing this for close to 10 years now. It's getting mature, and so it's creating more shade. So you have to be aware of that as well. And then make sure that at the beginning that you have access to water. You don't want to be lugging buckets out there. These two pictures here just show the size of my garden, like the size of it. It's not very big, as you can see. And I've got a shady section, which is closer to the tree. And then on the sunnier section, which is a little bit further out. But again, that is definitely being encroached on because the tree is getting more mature. Next. You have to think about the traffic patterns that happen in your neighborhood. You may be on a very busy street. You have to think about pedestrians. For me, that was something that I kind of thought about a little bit later. And so some of my grasses now, you can have started to move a little bit closer to the sidewalk, which is fine, but I have to be mindful of people walking by, or people who use wheelchairs, or baby carriages, or kids on bikes and things like that. So I have to every so often go back through my garden and trim back the grasses. So So I'm sharing my experience here. So, make sure you're setting things back. You're keeping that good foot or so on either side. So if somebody parks along the street, they can get out. That's one of the complaints I hear from people who don't really like the idea of Parkway Gardens, or they're a little bit nervous about it. They just feel that it can be very hard to get out of cars, and it's not very thoughtful about some of the other uses of parkways. Like we think, oh, we just want to put in all these plants and bring in all these animals, but we have to remember that these are shared spaces and we don't own this land either. And making sure that you are choosing appropriate plants. So do your research. You have to match what you're going to plant with your site conditions. You should know that, if you're planting under a tree, there is going to be some competition with the tree. I'll show you the tree roots a little bit later, but so you want plants that don't need a ton of water, that they're going to be pretty tough. So you want to really think about that. You also need to think about, what am I going for here? Do I want something like to really knock out pretty? Or am I more interested in pollinators? So you have to think about your goals, because that's also going to determine what plants you use and how many different species you'll put in. And, sorry, I think, was there a couple more bullets? Sorry, Judy. And then your gardening style, you're going to be more planned about it. You want to be more formal. Are you going to be looser? Like I'm a collector. I put things in. So I'm not very formal. And then you'll have to figure out how you're going to prep the site. That's going to be the big decision. So the big ones are like how big, your site conditions, sun, soil, and your traffic, and how you're going to prep. Next slide.
So I think I went forward and took control of that parkway without taking into consideration what the guidelines were in our village. So I appreciate that Stephanie added this piece about, you should really look at the community website of your town where you live and determine kind of what their guidelines are, just to avoid any frustrations in the future. So I really recommend that you take into consideration what those guidelines are. And the designing process can be so much fun, and it should really take some time. And I really recommend that you take pictures and walk through other gardens and learn about plants and get inspiration, because that's how I did it. And I learned about how these plants behave and what would be wonderful in my garden and what I wanted to try. It was another matter years and years ago about where would I find those plants. So that was a whole different story, because they weren't as accessible as they are today. But I really just kept a sketchbook and I made notes, and then I would draw designs and I would sketch out ideas. And I really got several different books and looked at online websites so that I could learn about prairie smoke. I really wanted to see how that behaved, and how does it multiply, and what will it take to get that sweeping look that I saw when I was inspired from the Lurie Garden when I first saw it down there. And so I think that as you think about your space, start small, as Stephanie said, and really take into consideration other gardens and what you like and what you don't like. And if you see something from somebody else's garden and it isn't necessarily all native, there usually is a native alternative to something that is a typical plant. I don't even know what they're called these days, but a regular plant, there's usually a native alternative to it. So again, just study and learn and look at some resources before you kind of go out and buy things. I think when it comes to the Parkway, we are more on a busier section. We're off of Division in Oak Park, and low growing plants is really what I'm looking for. Things that are knee level and below are ideal. There are some plants that are a little bit more vigorous and get a little bit higher than that, and so I just have to keep an eye on them and trim them back. But low growing plants is really important because of visibility when somebody's coming out of the alley or somebody's crossing at that intersection. So just keeping that in mind. Also, there are dogs that get curious and want to poke their noses into our gardens. And I'm pretty much open to pets and animals visiting and things like that, but you just have to be prepared. Like, just expect that people might, poke their heads in and prepare for that. If you are going to plant things that are taller, kind of keep them towards the middle, away from the intersections, the alleys and the walkways where people are coming through. But really, I would keep them under 3 feet. Just, again, learn about your plants and kind of study how big they get. Aggressive plants get planted last. I think that, again, learning from experience, some plants like to dominate a little bit and take over a little bit more. And so if you kind of plant densely, if you have a small section that you're starting with and you plant densely, you'll be able to better control some of those other plants that are a little bit more aggressive. One of the things that you'll see and hear from both Stephanie and me is that planting for all 4 seasons is really important. I'm looking for visual interest. I'm looking for a pollinator snack for them in the fall and even into the winter when I leave the seed heads. And so I'm looking for something that is going to bloom early spring into summer and then all the way into fall. And then I leave all of those seed heads for the most part. I do trim back some of the aggressive ones. And then I'm just going to keep going here, Stephanie. I don't know if we're sharing this one, but season-long blooms, you know, just again, studying what plant types will give you the biggest bang for your buck versus a short-lived. Of course, if there's something that you absolutely love and it's the most darling plant and it's short-lived, you're going to want to plant it. But if you're looking for impact on your parkway, think about, since it's more of a public viewing space, think about what's going to be long-lasting. Prairie smoke comes up as something that is very long-lasting. It becomes a ground cover after it's done blooming and fading, and we definitely will have pictures of that later. And then again, if you understand and learn about the plants that you're growing, you'll get a better sense of what they will look like when they are at their more mature. And so you'll allow that room for a favorite grass of mine is prairie dropseed. When you first plant it as a plug, it's about a foot wide, maybe about 6 inches wide. But when it gets to its mature size, it's about 2.5 feet wide. It's stunning. And so you want to kind of anticipate that and allow for other plants to be spaced out appropriately from around it. You want to chime in on anything here, Stephanie? I think you're muted, my friend.
No, I think we'll talk about planting away from the tree trunks and, you know, making sure you're aware of your mature sizes. And Oak Park, you know, wants to make sure that we're at 30 inches max. If you're at an intersection, and 36. I don't know if you said that specifically, Judy, but I just
didn't specify because
yeah. That's kind of what they're, as far as their rules, that's something that they're pretty clear about. All right. So this is, oh, you're starting, then
I'll start a little bit. So you'll see I've got a few more pictures of this coming up, but where did we begin? How did we prepare? And so you'll really see our journey. Each of us will tell our whole story. I took a class at the Oak Park Conservatory. This is long before I ever worked there, and it was on lawn maintenance. And they talked about a book, and I went out and I got the book, and I used the process called solarization. So I started with my very front lawn on my property, not the Parkway, and it was covered in creeping Charlie, and it was making me crazy. And I was really frustrated with all the grass that was on our property and felt that it was, you know, it had no purpose and it was high maintenance. And so I bought a 3 milliliter pond liner. It's basically a giant black rubber mat. And I laid it out on top of my lawn, and the heat from the sun over the course of many weeks decomposed the grass, the creeping Charlie, all the weeds. And you will see a picture of this. And so that's how I started my process. I used a natural approach. I was patient and took the time to do it. And then as I removed the mat, you would see all this decomposed material. I just raked it off. And then if I needed to, I would top dress with some compost. And then I was ready to start planting and planting that area. So that's pretty much how I got started preparing my site.
So for me, I had run out of space and when I lived in New Hampshire, we had really terrible soil. It was very rocky. And I had learned about lasagna gardening or sheet composting. And it was very successful for me. So I did that because it's very easy. It's you just have to collect things and put them down. You don't have to do any digging. So it's easier on your body, and it's much better for the soil organisms as well. So I did use cardboard. However, the garden professors have come out. They've been against it for a while because they felt it suffocated the soil. And I was always like, well, everything decomposes. So how can it be suffocated? Because for things to decompose, things have to be getting oxygen. So that didn't quite make sense to me. But then they had a graph of how there was a spike in CO2 being trapped or something. So I was like, still, that might just be temporary. I don't know how long that is because, again, everything decomposes fairly quickly. But the thing that really caught my attention that makes me rethink it now is some cardboard has, I guess, forever chemicals in it, to make them somewhat waterproof. And Judy, you thought maybe that might not be completely accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's all 100% definitive. I too have used
Cardboard.
cardboard, and I think, you should read up on it before you do it, and know that we're experimental and we're trying different things. Newspaper was also something that I collected and used. Have you found anything about newspaper being an issue, Stephanie?
No, and I've used that too. And if you look at this picture I've got on the right-hand side, this was actually mine. And I used just some like brown paper that came in as like packing material, and then some cardboard. And I do grab things from the street. So I had some grass, not my grass clipping, somebody else had put them out there. And then I collect leaves and put it over there. So it's super awesome. You do it in the fall. So you grab all those leaves that everybody is like unwisely putting out into the streets, and put it down. And then I put layers, it gets, pretty thick, and then put some mulch down, and you let it cook over the fall and the winter. And then when the spring comes around, it's very friable soil. You can dig in very quickly. There may be some cardboard left, but a lot of it's pretty gone. And if you do have to get to the cardboard, it's very weak at that point. And then it still acts as like kind of a nice weed suppressant. But yeah, it's worked out very well for me. But you can use, and I have done things where I've started it in the middle of the summer. I had like seedlings that I had to get in the ground. I'm like, okay, I'll extend the Parkway a little bit more to jam those guys in there. And so I did use some newspaper. I wet the newspaper down, dug out some holes in it. And then, no, I didn't actually. I put down the newspaper, I wet it down. I put some compost that I had for my passive compost piles in the backyard. It's where I put everything. And then I just planted my little seedlings in there and put some mulch down, and it was fine. It worked out really well. And then over time, it just becomes part of the soil. So I really recommend that. It's, the drawbacks are that you have to collect the materials, you have to put them somewhere. As you're assembling it, it might not be super pretty to look at. But you can put mulch down, then it just looks like a garden bed when people like cut everything down. So that's what I like to do. I know people, if you've got a larger Parkway, you could use a sod cutter or dig it up, but that's more labor intensive and impacts soil organisms. So anytime you start digging into the soil, you're rupturing all of the fungal connections, any of the other organisms, the shredders that are in there, and firefly larvae, etc. So I really think doing the sheet composting is best. You can also just put down newspaper or that brown paper, and then getting a bunch of not mulch, what is it? Tree chips or tree, that kind of roughly chopped up material that the village offers. Sometimes there can be weeds in that, so that's not super ideal either. So you just have to be kind of managing the garden.
And I think because we're not planting edible plants in this area, that we're using, things like, we're not putting tape on our cardboard boxes. We're using, minimally printed on
Mhm.
cardboard boxes and or newspaper or this brown paper. But we're not planting for an edible garden here. So I think that's just something else to take into consideration. Okay, I'm going to keep us moving.
Okay. So if you are gonna start, if you do any digging, make sure you call 811 and have Julie come out and they just check things. So you know where to be careful. Because if you really dig down, you can hit gas line or something. You don't want to do that. It's free. They come out and they do they do the little flags. And then you need to be thinking about tree roots. So this is a big one, especially if you've got a tree there. They don't go down, they go wide. So here is a picture. I don't really know what they did here, if they were cutting and trying to make a road or something, but you can see how the roots really, they really go the width of the tree canopy. They go out along the surface. So you can, if you start really digging in, this is why I like the sheet and the lasagna compost method, is because you won't have to do any deep digging into the soil. So that you just need to be careful about that. And don't buy gallons or even like big quarts or anything like that. Stick with those smaller plant sizes, because the hole you're making is a little bit more shallow and smaller. And that will, help your tree. And you don't want to plant right up against the trunk either. So sometimes I have to go out and have to thin away from the trunk. And this is a great image of a typical root system, how it's very kind of shallow but just goes out super wide. And what's kind of interesting is you see the tree canopy, and at the end of the tree canopy, they call it the drip line, which is where a lot of the roots will go, because that's where the tree will collect a lot of water. I think it's like 100 gallons or something of a mature tree. Doug Tallamy talked about this. And then it'll hang on to some of that water, and it will slowly drip down to the roots below the canopy. But outside that, there's the drip line, which is where it collects a lot of the water. So we have to be thinking about that. So don't be digging multiple big gallon size holes under your mature tree, because you can harm it. You can end up killing it, weaken it over it might not seed immediately, but it can happen. You'll weaken enough, and in a couple of years it can die. Next.
Okay, so tips from how we keep our gardens neighborhood friendly. So again, this is the Parkway, and you do have kids and pets and strollers and all sorts of bikes and skateboards and things rolling through. So just some tips from us. Like I said earlier, planting with 4 seasons in mind, because that gives passersby something to admire and enjoy. And I have created an inviting pathway through mine. So you'll see some pictures, but I've got kind of arched pathways, stepping stones all throughout the whole parkway. And it really is meant to invite the kids and adults, whoever's passing through, to walk through the garden. That's why I did it. I think that it creates a more engaging opportunity with neighbors, and it gets us talking to our neighbors, which is a good thing. And also, if I'm out there, which I usually like to be on a regular basis, just looking at things or moving things, or catching a weed here and there, I also have the opportunity to share any knowledge about the particular plants or what's blooming. And I really like to talk with our neighbors as they're passing by. On the property side, I have service berries. We've got a massive black currant. We've got an elderberry. We have strawberries. And so along the house is kind of this berry patch. And so that's how I've met a lot of the neighbors with the kids, because they would just come out and help us pick. And I haven't gotten any black currants or elderberries yet, but I think this is my year. They look like and these are 2 shrubs that I got from the West Cook Wild Ones garden sale in the fall. Again, just keeping an eye on the height. If you take a step back and kind of look down your entire parkway, everything should be about the same height or lower. So just kind of giving it that big picture perspective and looking at the whole length of your property. And, once it gets mature and filled in, it's not like we have to do a lot of weeding. It's just not a concern. But I find that with my parkway, now that the entire kind of side block because we're a long division, because it's such a long stretch, it does feel like things blow in there. And if I do plant any annuals to complement, sometimes they self-seed. And so I do have to kind of keep an eye on things. And I'm pulling things if they've seeded along the way. And so I'm out there because I enjoy it and I want to just keep an eye on things. And I just want to make sure that it looks the best that it possibly can. So Stephanie?
Sure. So for as I mentioned earlier, my thing I have to really keep track of it, the garden boundaries, just keeping those grasses trimmed back. That's like my big struggle. I feel like I just did it and I got to go do it again. But so I really recommend, a foot or two back. I do work a little bit at making it attractive. I'm probably not as much as Judy. I'm more concerned. No, I know you are concerned. I didn't mean to say it like that, Judy. I just want to get the diversity in there as much as possible. And so like right now I do have like not the whole thing it's almost all even right now. So sorry, Judy, but I got some penstemon it's in a shadier spot than it would like. And so it's starting to shoot up the stalks and I was kind of thinking, oh, maybe I should cut that down, but I'm just going to let it go because it's, it's going to put out a few blooms. And to me, that's a little bit more, it'll look probably pretty when it's blooming. And I will let it go to seed because I'm not going to cut it after it's bloomed. So there are things where I stubbornly just stick to, like my main goal is ecology and the environment. And so I do nods to aesthetics and making sure that people can read it as a garden. But I'm still a little bit stubborn about like, if it's not perfect, it's not perfect. And what to me is perfect is going to be different from other people. So, but I do try to make sure it's as attractive as possible. And I really recommend having calyxes or like if you have a sunnier section, like little blue stem or prairie dropseed as a border. Just because it gives that, it's kind of like a little living fence once it's growing. Judy and I both use long beak sedge along our walkways, and it's very tolerant of dog urine. So it looks good, but it's, when it is putting seeds out right now, I do have to trim that a little bit. I do have to keep track of litter. I feel like that's really important because especially in the fall and the winter when I leave everything standing. So it looks different from people who clear out the garden completely. Litter can get in there and I don't want it to look like an uncared for space. So we do have to make sure I'm out there every day or so picking up litter as it blows in. And when I do clean up, I think Judy and I, we have to remember to talk about how we maintain, like we do clean up. I don't keep stems cut at 12 to 24 inches, like right along the parkway, just in case somebody falls or something like that. So I am thoughtful in that way too. So any of the stems that are left up, they're further away from the sidewalk. So I leave some stems cut because it becomes a nesting habitat for some of our native bees that use the hollow stems, which is pretty cool. And it's a simple thing to do to help support a diversity of native bees. Yeah, and just keeping, and then like when keeping the sidewalks cleared up too, because you'll get, trees dropping their leaves or their branches or stems. And I feel like that's also really important. I don't like, I like to keep floors clean. So it goes for the sidewalk as well. That's always a job. There's always leaves that blowing in and debris from the plant. So I just pick it up and it goes back into the garden. Dogs. So I'm a dog owner and I love dogs. I think some people, they kind of let their dogs do whatever. And that can be kind of upsetting to see. So I try to keep those tougher plants at the edges, or the plants I don't really, that they're a little bit more aggressive, or if a dog pees on it, I'm not gonna like end up really crying about it. So that's really important. So on our website, we have Pretty Up Your Parkway post, and I did some research into what plants can withstand dog urine, and those tend to be the salt tolerant plants. So I put those in there. And I think if I wasn't clear about the salt tolerance, I put an asterisk next to it. Somehow I marked it if it wasn't clear. So if we put that link in chat, so you know, if you're looking for plants, you know, that can withstand dog urine, that's there. Any of my more kind of precious plants go in the middle or further away. The other thing that I've noticed with people who walk their dogs is sometimes like during the fall and the winter, it's not, you know, things aren't really growing actively or blooming anymore. So then people will start to let their dogs just walk through the garden. And that kind of makes me a little bit crazy because, as we all know, just because it looks dormant doesn't mean that things aren't living in there, or the dog walking through is going to, you know, compress the soil and the roots and crush fireflies and any overwintering beneficials. So sometimes I'll put up a sign if I start to see a lot of that happening. But I think it's getting better. It's just, it can be very frustrating to see. And yeah, I use a low fence. I think somebody mentioned that in chat, and I've got one because I was starting to put in some newer little baby plants, and their dogs were still getting in there. So I just put up a low fence to demarcate the space.
Yeah, and you know, the dogs, I enjoy when people are bringing their dogs by, because that means that they feel like this is part of their circle while they're walking their dogs. And I haven't run into really any issues with dog walkers. And you know, there's the occasional, I think, you know, during the pandemic, there was like dog droppings, whatever, that was left through in the garden. But honestly, I haven't had any real issues, and I actually welcome the people with their pets. So I'm glad that we can create these engaging and inviting spaces. I also have such hardy plants out there. I said nothing can kill my goldenrods and my golden Alexanders and my grasses. I mean, I've just got some really wonderful hardy plants, and they just kind of withstand the weather and the elements. And another thing that Stephanie and I both share is that maybe once we were getting our gardens established, we used like wood chips or mulch. But now all I use is leaves, and I don't have a lot of leaves falling off of my trees. So I actually go into those piles from neighbors that get pushed into the street, and I collect those, or I go to a neighbor's backyard and I collect their leaves, and I use them as leaf cover and mulch in my own garden. And it's really wonderful. And so when you walk by, you'll see the sections of my garden that I've left them, I haven't cut them back, and they just start to bloom again. And it creates like this mat, and there's really no weeds in that entire section where the leaves have been and where we've left the plants just to live their full cycle. So really think about how leaves can be beneficial in your garden and restore the soil. And then we really don't even use de-icers, but even when the village comes driving down Division, they've got salt that's coming out. And like I said, those plants are quite hardy. And what we know about their roots is that they're so deep, and they do capture carbon. And I'm assuming they capture a lot of those other chemicals and elements that are spewed out, and it just doesn't impact the growth on the top. Okay, ready, Stephanie? Oh, you have to unmute. Unmute. There you go.
Sorry, I was just getting the link for the garden professor's website that who talk about the cardboard. Somebody had in chat had mentioned the cardboard controversy. So sorry. So we'll get that link out to you later. I was Googling. Well, sorry, Judy. Okay. So my parkway is 4 feet wide and by 12 feet, and I'm able to get about 30 species in there. Probably a little bit more. And like I said earlier, it was 2015. I've grown most of my plants from seed. If I supplemented, it was through plugs and pints, generally from our plant sales. So in the upper left-hand corner, it's the plants that I leave standing up around this time in the fall, people are cutting things down. I love all the colors. Then there's a photo in the winter, a lot of snow, and then a little bit earlier spring, probably April or so, or May. But next slide. So I'm just gonna go through some of the plants that I have in the garden. I'll try to be pretty quick here. So in the shadier section, I've got this lovely little Jacob's ladder. And behind it is Virginia waterleaf. And then I've got on the other side, the far side, you can see that's the long beak sedge that's starting to come up. And then I've got burr sedge. And then up in the front, there's tall delphinium that now I've had to move. It's been too shady there. On the right-hand side is a shooting star, which is a spring ephemeral. It's pretty tough. It doesn't want a lot of competition, needs good amount of sun. So it's more at the sunnier section of my garden now. But when I started with this several years ago, it brought in a really cool bumblebee called the Northern Golden Bumblebee. And that was my first introduction to that bee, which is getting close to being on the endangered list. But they tend to do well here in Oak Park. I have a picture of it a little bit later. Next. So just back to shooting stars. So it's one of those early bloomers. So having these early bloomers is really important because some of our bees come out early. They have staggered times. And when they come out, especially overwintering bumblebee queens, it's one female will overwinter and she's mated and she's got to start her colony all by herself in the spring. So it's really important to have these blooms for them that they can use. They can't use like tulips and daffodils and things like that. That's what people mostly have planted. So it's really critical to have native plants. And also the flowering trees are also really important. I had white trillium in my garden and I think it maybe got dug up. So don't put in like precious plants because they can get possibly taken. There was a hole and then my trilliums, I didn't see them again, or they got peed on or something. So it was great there. They were really pretty. I wanted to do something like that because I wanted to have special plants for people to be able to see, and get people thinking about how cool some of these native ephemerals are. But I don't know what, I think it got dug up and taken because there was a big hole. And then Virginia waterleaf is in the middle here. And I really love this. It is aggressive. So you do need to, be aware of that and plan for it. It tends to move into any open spaces. The leaves are edible. So if you plant it in a place where you've got, good soil and you've checked for, chemicals and lead and things like that, you can eat the leaves. And the reason I have it is for the blooms, which it's blooming now. And I actually, Heather Holm, who is that specialist on native bees, she identified that little bee as a Virginia waterleaf specialist. So we have bees that they have to specialize in certain plants. So that means that the female has to get the pollen from a particular kind of plant to feed her larva. Her larva won't develop if they don't have that particular pollen. So it's kind of cool that, Virginia waterleaf has that relationship and that it's in my garden and I'm in like a very urban area. Over on the right is wild hyacinth, another beautiful spring ephemeral. That can do part shade. It's in more of the sunnier section, so it does need some sun. And that is also edible, but you probably, you would want to have a massive amount before you started harvesting. Next slide. And this is that smooth penstemon with a orange tipped digger bee. So you get like a lot of diversity of bees when you start looking. So my garden this Parkway garden is one of my favorite places to go look for bees. I don't know, I feel like I get different kinds in that Parkway, in that small little area. It's pretty amazing. And I really recommend smooth penstemon. It is It is super hardy and it looks really beautiful, especially if you plant it like in a mass. And it will bloom, you know, it'll bloom in shade, not as prolifically as it would in sun, but I think the leaves are nice looking. It's glossy. They get kind of a red color too in the fall. So I highly recommend this plant. And then these all are kind of May, early June bloomers. June can be a little bit of a tough season to get blooms. So on the left, I recommend Bradbury's Monarda. It stays fairly short. It's beloved by bumblebees, hummingbirds. And in the middle is that tall larkspur or tall delphinium, and that is the northern golden bumblebee. And they always come to that plant. So I have to always make sure I have that that delphinium. And yeah, it's really cool plant because you'll have like a dark purple like this, and then you'll have like light. I have other pictures where it's almost like a light dusty pink. So I really recommend this plant too. It can get, it's probably pushing that 36-inch. But the blooms are really airy that you can see through it pretty easily. And I don't have like a bunch of things that are all 36 inches. So this might be, when it's in bloom, one of the taller things, and it's kind of in the middle of the garden. And then on the right hand, love downy wood mint. This is a great little plant, stays short. Like all these plants, except for the tall delphinium, stay about 2 feet. So they're really wonderful to have in the garden, and just super important plants for pollinators. Next slide. And they're in the on the left-hand side is that tall delphinium. It's Delphinium exaltatum is the Latin name, and it's so exultant. I love it. And it's more of the light pink color there. And then I've got blue lobelia starting to come up. What's kind of interesting, when you plant for 4 seasons, you'll have the plants kind of pop up when they're ready to bloom, and then they kind of subside. And the plants that bloom later are always kind of a little bit shorter, and they're kind of waiting their turn. So the blue lobelia here is kind of like down, but as you get a little bit closer to September, it starts to pop up, and then you get those beautiful blue blooms. And then Coreopsis is another great plant to have in your Parkway garden. Very cheery yellow blooms. You can plant it in mass. Really important for pollinators. I always get like those cool green metallic little bees, and it will bloom starting in June, and will go through, I think, like August maybe. It's a really long bloomer. I love it. Next slide. On the left-hand side, my very precious pale coneflower. So that's in the sunnier section. I recommend pale. This is not purple coneflower. This is pale coneflower because it starts blooming in June, so a month earlier than purple coneflower. And so we'll get visited by butterflies. They love coneflowers. So it's really nice to have that in the garden. You can see kind of in the back there is a plant that's spiking up, and that's bunch flower, which is one of those precious plants. And I have it in the middle. That one I take my dehumidifier water to because it needs a lot of moisture and a lot of sun. So I may end up having to move it. So I do kind of break my rule, but I just didn't have any other place for it. There was nowhere that I could put it to give it the conditions it needed. So I took a risk, and it's out there. It seems to be doing okay. And on the right-hand side, good old, showy brown-eyed Susan. So they come back every year. I love them. They're very cheery, and they don't get as tall as some of the other ones, as some of the other brown-eyed Susans. Sorry, behind the brown-eyed Susans, some nodding onion, and I got some slides dedicated to those, so I'll show you that in a second. And then this over to the left, a little taller, sort of candelabra-ish plants. That's hoary vervain, and that is another lovely little prairie plant that likes more sun and stays a little bit shorter. And then on the right-hand side, that is wild petunia. So this is a really good case in point. I didn't bring in wild petunia in my garden till like very late. So if you just put in wild petunia and you have a lot of open space, you're going to end up with a lot of wild petunia. So it's kept in check because everything is planted so densely. So I like it. It kind of finds any open spaces and kind of wends its way through. And so I have these little dashes of this like dusty lilac purple color. Next slide. This is Nodding Onion, and I just love it. So this one is a good candidate too for edging. I don't know if it's really will withstand dog pee, maybe. But so because they kind of end up, they have that fountainy look and they end up looking like a grass. So I don't, in some places I have it in the kind of lining the different edges of different parts of different gardens I have, not on the Parkway, but this is in the Parkway. So really pretty. It's got that elegant sort of, hanging head. And then as they bloom, like on the right, they start to kind of pop up. And again, super, I think, oh yeah, there's a bee on there. It's a bumblebee. It might be I can't really tell. It might be that 2-spotted longhorn bee. But yeah, so really great. So you have these plants in there. There's always stuff happening in the garden. Next slide. Oh, Nodding Onion is edible too. Oh, and butterfly weed. So I have that in the sunnier section, obviously. And I do get monarchs on it. So it's a monarch caterpillar. And it's tucked in here. It's at the edge in the sunnier section. And this is a really great picture because you can see how the long beak sedge, it's Carex, the Latin name is Carex sprengeli, is really, I think it's just so pretty. It's got this soft, flowy look to it. It's just, I think it's really, really pretty. And then, yeah, and the butterfly weed comes up. It's still not up yet. And go ahead. That's great. Next one. I have Northern Blazing Star, which is one of the shorter Liatris species. So I think that's great. When it was blooming in my garden towards the end of the summer, the beginning of the migration season for monarchs, I had like 6 on them. I have multiple plants. But yeah, so that's, it was like a beautiful sight to see them all around there. So I highly recommend Northern Blazing Star also in your Parkway garden. It's really important to have these plants in the late summer and the fall because monarchs, as you probably know, but if you don't, they migrate. So the last generation here, they stay in sort of a juvenile status. They don't go into reproductive status while they're migrating. They have to gain weight to overwinter because they'll overwinter for like, I don't know how many, it's like 6 months or something like that down in Mexico. And so they have to eat a lot to get that fat and they're migrating. So they need a lot of energy for that. So it's really, really important that we put as much in as possible because of, competition from honeybees and things like that. So we have to make sure we have all these plants in. Next slide, please. So looking from the shadier section on the left, I recommend Starry Campion. It loves a shadier spot, handles dry conditions. When we get those extreme droughts, I do make sure I give it some water. But what's nice about it is I have this planted in with that Virginia waterleaf. That's kind of aggressive. So Virginia waterleaf for me goes pretty much dormant around, this is in July. So then the Starry Campion kind of pops up. So it is nice when you can think about your plants and you can coordinate it and you've got things interplanted. So like I got the Virginia waterleaf, and then so when that's done, then I got Starry Campion comes up in the same spot because they can all live together. It's okay. You don't need to have one plant and then 6 feet of space. That is not a good idea anyway. So yeah, so I really maximize the little bit of space I have. In the upper right, that's False Sunflower. That was a volunteer and I kind of let it go. It stayed pretty short. It can get kind of tall, probably over the 36 max, but I think I may have pruned it a little bit, but it stayed small. It's cheery. And it had a little bit of an open spot and actually some Monarda, wild bergamot, the other blue plants there. That volunteered itself in there. And I'm like, if something volunteers and it wants to try, to make it and give some blooms, that's great. I mean, I have other places with these plants, but it doesn't hurt. So it was, the the earth was telling me that this is an empty area and there should be something in there. So I just kind of follow the lead. I'm very flexible with my garden. I don't expect it to be a static thing and to look the same. And I expect for it to change. And I, if something puts itself in there, I want to see what happens. And then bottom right is another view from another end. It's got, you see the hoary vervain. The plant that's not blooming is aromatic aster, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Next slide. This is late summer, might be September, getting to October, and I love great blue lobelia. So earlier I had mentioned where the delphinium was tall and that blue lobelia, the plant itself was staying kind of low. It's now has sprung up. It stays under the 30-inch thing, but this thing will just be, it'll just have so many bees on it. These cool little tiny bees like making their way into those turtle. They almost look like little, what are those little plants? What are those plants called that snap? Oh, snapping. I don't know. Thank you, snapdragons. So they look like that. And then I have got some white snake root, which people tend to hate on, but I, again, let some in. They hate it because it gets super aggressive. And if you don't, I do pull seedlings, but again, my gardens are pretty densely packed and I know what it looks like. And so if I leave it, I know it's a good spot for it, and it's gonna look nice later on. And then some of that fall sunflower is still blooming. And on the right, I really love gray goldenrod. I love it so much. So the foliage is that nice gray color, and it stays really short, like probably like close to 2 feet. I just can't. It bloomed beautifully. I grew it, but it didn't come back the next year. And I just don't know what it is, if it's just too crowded. I know it doesn't like competition. It might need more of a gravelly soil, but it's worth a try. It's a great little goldenrod plant. So there's so many different kinds of goldenrod. I think I have 7 different species in my yard. I keep trying different ones. And if you've got a lot of sun, you get a hot, dry area, I definitely recommend trying that gray goldenrod. Next slide. And this is late. This is early fall. Blue mist, if it's shady, it doesn't get too aggressive. If you've got full sun, moist conditions, it will like definitely spread out. But it's pretty shady, it's a little bit drier. It doesn't get too expansive. And monarchs will come to it. It's really important in the fall, and all kinds of bees. And then again, white snake root moving through it. In the sort of the back, the little white flowers there, that's one of the volunteer asters. I do keep some volunteer asters. It's usually the Drummond's aster, and I prune those. So if you prune asters before July 4th, they'll stay a little bit more compact for you and still bloom. And then a little fiery skippers, cute little butterfly on white snake root. So people hate it. I like it. I mean, I know it's like, it can get very busy, but keep it around if you can. Next slide. Blue stem goldenrod. This is, so on the left, the thing that's exploding with those kind of arching rays. Blue stem goldenrod is super awesome. This is the shadier section, so it's kind of gone a little bit like, woo, it's like really happy and exploding. But I have it also in shadier spots. And I actually in the same garden at the shady end, it stays much more restrained. It still blooms, which is great to have something that will bloom in the fall in the shade. It's not many things that will. That's helpful for pollinators. So I recommend this too. So if you put in a shadier section, make sure you give it some room. But it's one of those two that will kind of like stay small, but when it's ready to bloom, it starts to really expand. So I love it. It's great. And it's got those, and it is, when you look at the stems, they are blue. It's really cool. And then New England aster, this was a volunteer, but I let it stay and it pruned it down and really pruned it down because it can get pretty tall. Next slide. And this is just a view of my Parkway garden kind of a little bit later. So it is, you can tell it's getting to the end of the season. There still is the blue stem goldenrod is on the left-hand side. And then some of those volunteer asters are the the little white that's kind of punctuating throughout the garden. And the lower blue spots, that's blue mist, and that's on the right-hand side too. And some people at this time of the year, they would cut everything out. And I just think that's just such a travesty, because like there's so many beautiful colors happening. There's all kinds of reds and browns and purples, and even greens. Like, I don't know, embrace all those colors. Next slide. And then aromatic aster. Everybody should grow this. This is in the fuller sun, but it will bloom also in shadier sections. And what's funny is in my shadier spots where I've got it, it blooms earlier than in the sunnier section. I don't know, but I really love it. It's great. It will be covered in every pollinator in the neighborhood, because this will start blooming October and will go into even November, the beginning of November. And even when we get some snow, it will, you know, as long as we don't get like a super deep hard freeze, it'll keep blooming till it's done. And everything is on this. So I really wish more people would grow it, because the bees need it. And like with everybody keeping so many honeybee hives around here, all those honeybees are coming to this aromatic aster, and and I'm trying to provide for native bees, and all these honeybees are coming in. And this has been researched that the honeybees provide a lot of competition, because each hive has 40 to 50,000 bees. And, you know, and native bees is like a single female who is trying to provide for her young, and they don't fly very far. That some of the smaller ones, they only fly 100 feet or so. Bumblebees might be able to make it, you know, a little bit further. I think they might go up to a mile. Plus the bumblebees at this time, if they're still out and about, that's going to be the mated queen who has to overwinter. So she's got to really build up her stores. So she doesn't need competition from like 40,000 honeybees, right? And multiple hives in this area. It's just too many of them. But enough of that. So I really, the plant in the right picture, that is Bowman's root, and it has these beautiful little blooms, delicate blooms in the summer, and then I just think it's really pretty color in the fall. And then to the bottom of it, that's gray goldenrod, you know, going to seed, but unfortunately didn't seed itself. That's my garden. I'm all set.
Okay, fantastic. What a tour.
Thanks, Judy.
So I will keep us moving and introduce you to, oh, you might be familiar with this friend or foe. This is Creeping Charlie. This is what was growing all over my grass, and we really wanted to get it out. So, here is what my Parkway looked like before. There's my daughter, Ella. She's about 4 years old in this picture. So let me show you kind of how it transformed. Remember, I talked about the process of solarization using a pond liner. This is the pond liner, and we left it on for many weeks until it seemed like it had cooked. And then we checked on it. And this is my son, Leo. He's going to be 20 years old this summer. So you can tell how long ago we started this process. But when I lifted up a corner, this is what was underneath. And so you saw all that Creeping Charlie and all of those weeds and grass. And this is what happened once we used the solarization process. So it was just brilliant. And once I saw how easy it was and how lovely it was to just cover up that mess, I kept going and I kept going and I kept going. So here's a picture of, let's see, there it is. Here's the picture of my daughter, Ella, a few weeks ago. This is from April. She's standing in the Parkway garden today. So she was pushing that lawnmower, and now the entire Parkway garden is planted with those stepping stones. So you can see how over time we really transformed that space. So this is a bird's eye view from a couple of years ago. Just kind of showing you what I began with and what the vision was. We had some non-native, I can't even remember what these are called, but I love having a couple of these still remaining, and I'm I'm blanking on whatever they're called. But you can see the stepping stone pathways that we've put in and kind of winding through a lot of low grasses. And I really love the low grasses with a pop of liatris purple coming up and through, or I love pale purple coneflower has been a favorite. And you can see how it's just like kind of a fun way to path through the neighborhood. I believe, yeah, so this I took this morning. Okay, so this is what the Parkway looks like this morning, and it has really filled in quite a bit. Last year, we suffered through some construction issues on, they redid this little sidewalk, and without my knowing, they came through and plowed through my corner patch over here, right at the corner of Division, and took the plants with it, and they disrupted the stepping stones. So I will get those relayed nicely later this summer. But this just gives you an idea of what's happening in spring, and a lot of grasses and some we've got common milkweed and longbeak sedge and penstemon and pale purple coneflower. What else? I've got some wild onions that are in here. And I've gone through if there's anything like my brown-eyed Susans or my asters that have self-seeded over here. I've gone through and I've lopped them off. And so I do the chop and drop and I prune everything so that it just maintains that lower height, especially at that corner. Over to the right, I have Ohio spiderwort. And right now it's, this morning, it was almost in full bloom. And so that's just really lovely seeing that. I've got some wild petunia and a real wide variety of different grasses that stay quite low. Here's just another view. Prairie dropseed, one of my favorites. Fell in love with that from years ago. Why can't I remember the name of the non-native plant that's here?
It's autumn sedum.
It's sedum, of course.
Yeah,
I know.
you're helping.
I can't. So this is just like street eye view. And if you look at the picture on the right, there's a little patch of grass at the top on my property. That's now all been planted and there's a new stepping stone pathway. And this whole corner to the far right of that picture was bulldozed when they were doing construction. And so there's a whole new pathway that I put in on the corner, and then I continued it over into this next little patch of grass. So basically, there's only one small patch of grass around this tree at the very top here that's left out in front. So everything else is planted. Okay, so here's that pale purple coneflower that I love as well because it just has a real delicate bloom and it does self-seed, but I've got plenty of space to fill, as you can see. So I love it, and I just move it around. And once it gets established, it kind of has a bigger base. And I do sometimes put a ring to help it stay up just because I like that look. And I don't have a lot of other supportive plants around it. Let's see what's next. Okay, so here, this is either prairie dropseed or little blue stem, but I do love gardening with grasses. And so take a look and study grasses. There's so many that are offered at the Westcook Wild Ones plant sale. I know it is now closed, but just keep your eye out for a variety of different grasses that can be available. Gray sedge, we talked about longbeak sedge. I've got a June grass that I put in, oval sedge, oval shouldered sedge, a lot of low growing grasses. And I've got a June sedge out there now. I think I ordered a few more grasses. I love the grasses because I can count on them filling in the spaces and staying low. And then I can add in additional pops of color throughout. So let's see what else is here. This is prairie alum root. And behind it, this is ironweed, and that one does get a little bit tall, but it's smack dab in the middle of the parkway, and I just leave it. I also have some zigzag goldenrod, and this whole section has been replanted. This is from about a year or two ago, and I moved these prairie alum roots to a more moist and shady environment. They just weren't as happy there, and I moved some of the zigzag goldenrod, and I filled in with some shorts aster and some purple prairie clover, and a lot of those grasses are there now. So it changes. It just continuously is changing. Here's butterfly milkweed. I am always putting in more butterfly milkweed. I've always got a hole to fill. You just have to remember or put a stick noting where you planted it so that you don't put something else on it, because it doesn't start to pop up until later in the spring. So it's easy to forget about it. Here's that prairie smoke. So this is prairie smoke. It forms this mat across these nice ground cover. Leaves are thick. It grows as a rhizome, and they just kind of fill in and fill in and fill in. And then eventually when they bloom, it's this beautiful, wispy, feathery, cloud-like bloom that comes out, and it just becomes this glorious display. And it's just about blooming now. A lot of them are starting to feather out. So this is a great time to come through and enjoy prairie smoke. Here's that burr sedge or gray sedge that I just love. This self-seeds quite a bit, and I have the space for it. So I kind of let it take over a little bit, and then I move it around. And I just recently dug it up and shared it with some neighbors. So this is more shade loving, but it's very happy on the Parkway. So I test the waters a little bit. I love, love, love rattlesnake master. So I grew up with yucca. And I don't know if you also grew up with that, but my mom should still be on the Zoom. And so that was a plant that this reminds me of. Yucca has that white flower on a very tall, thin stem, whereas rattlesnake master has kind of a grayish blue spiky bulb that comes up, and it has all these interesting little spikes. So the leaves are very interesting, and the base of this will get wider and wider, but I risk it by putting something that has a skinny stem that's a little bit taller than the 30 inches. So that's where I'm a little bit of a renegade. Here's the Golden Alexander, donated from one of Westcook Wild One's co-founders, Pam Todd. And it took a couple of years for it to really get established. And then boom, this year it's everywhere. So I'm starting to dig it up and move it. And I will probably have to deadhead a little bit with this because it was pretty aggressive. But the bees love it, and it blooms early spring. And there's this sea of like yellow foamy plants when you walk through the Parkway right now, and it's really just lovely. Here it is close up, and then of course it attracts a variety of different bees. And I don't know what that bee is. Of course, Stephanie probably knows. I'm putting you on the spot. Sorry. So it gets a little bush-like. So again, like come by and study it, and then you'll see what it looks like when it fills in. And it's got like a lot of action with the leaves, and then these long stems come out with these yellow shoots. So I just love it, and I have a lot of space to fill, so it works for my Parkway. The common milkweed is self-seeded. I haven't planted a single one. It's self-seeded, but I leave it. And this year I have started to top it off. I'm actually pruning it just to test to see if I could keep it at a shorter height for that Parkway, because there's so much of it now. But you can see why it's so popular for the monarchs, and it's crucial to have this plant in our gardens. And whether you put it on your Parkway or in your backyard or elsewhere, it's just so important to have something for the butterflies to enjoy. It's really critical. That sedum, by the way, here's what the sedum does. The sedum becomes a hiding place for the caterpillars to go crawl off and hide when they form their chrysalis. So this was found by one of my little neighbor friends. She was 5 or 6 years old at the time, and she was walking along the steps in my path. And she said, "Oh, I found a chrysalis." And I was like, I never would have seen it if it wasn't for a little neighbor taking a look at it. And so the sedum plays a role, and it does also offer nectar in the fall for the bees. And so I'm fine blending some non-natives in with the native plants. Okay, so there's a lot more going on in my garden right now, but really come take a look when you have a chance. I'm going to just go through some lessons learned, and Stephanie and I both have some slides here. So because my Parkway is such a large area, I really recommend starting with one small section. Just plant a zone and let it be and kind of watch and see what happens. You'll see what your light conditions are, what your moisture conditions are, and it'll give you a chance to not overplant. You can really get out of control and overzealous. And what I've learned is that planting fewer species to start with, and then introducing a liatris or introducing another flower into the mix really works well. Like I said, step and repeat. Keep dividing and moving things and try to maintain some consistency. So if you are planting that public parkway, I prefer to really tend it and maintain some consistency so it looks like I've got a planned garden. In the back, I get a little bit more crazy and I let things go a little bit more, but because it's a parkway garden, I really want it to look like it's a little bit more consistent, minimizing those new varieties. You really do need access to water to help establish. We had a drought a couple of summers ago, and I expect that we'll see it again. So really think about the plants that you're putting in and plan for the future. If you do have plants that you're putting in that are very heavy water feeders, you need to plant them where you have a spout. And then on that parkway, think about plants that will survive in drought conditions, in very dry conditions, because that's basically what it is out there. Keep in mind, learning from our lessons, we do not own the parkway. So the village can come through and plow over with their bulldozer. They can rip up the stepping stones. They may need to access a fire hydrant. So you have to keep these things in mind. Sometimes they need to access the not in my particular area, but along the other street, they might have to access the gas line, the electric lines. And so you have to be prepared that if you are going to venture out and plant the Parkway Garden, that we don't own this space and you have to kind of work with the village so that you don't get completely frustrated and out of your mind. Litter construction and work crews. Every day I'm out there doing a litter. For some reason, people think that they can just, dump their trash right out the window of their cars. And every day I'm out there picking up cans and wrappers and cigarette things and any number of things. I've seen it all. And so I'm just out there every day as part of my walkthrough to take care of and tend that space because I want it to look like something that is attractive. And please use the leaves instead of wood chips or mulch. Save the leaves in a pile and use those as your little things to tuck in between the plants as you're planting. It's so beneficial and it decomposes nicely. I think that's all I had. Stephanie, up to you now.
Did you want to talk about how you don't really have many weeds?
I don't have many weeds. If I have things that are taking over, it's because I would plant like coleus and I'd let it go to seed. And now there's little baby coleuses all over my garden. And so I'm trying to maintain, and the areas that don't have the leaf litter are more susceptible to picking up whatever's floating out there. So in the sections that are densely planted and I leave the natural material to decompose, there are no weeds in that whole section. So it's really miraculous once your gardening gets going.
Yeah, I just want to add on that leaf litter is so important. We never rake out our gardens. It's never raked out. It's not necessary. Some of the leaves do collect and they get heavy, over the winter and the fall. But in the spring, as things are coming up, I just very simply go out and I just move the leaves off and on the side, it acts like a mulch. By July, most of the leaves have decomposed and I'm going out into my backyard where I've got some little leaf piles and grabbing what I've sort of squirreled away to replenish. So and what's interesting is that if I do have some areas where there aren't any leaves, like that have been blown clear, the ground will start to, if we haven't had rain in a little while, will start to crack. But the areas that have leaves, that doesn't happen. And soil is super easy to dig into. So for various reasons, leaving the leaves is important. And keeping them whole is ideal for a couple of reasons. One is that a lot of our native moths, butterfly caterpillars, could be attached to those leaves. And so if you chop them up, right, you run over lawnmower, you put them through a chopper, you're going to be chopping them up. But our native plants, especially our like more woodland plants, trees and shrubs, they prefer soil that is dominated by fungi, I don't say it. And when you have whole leaves, that after they get some shredding done, those, larger like roly-polies and centipedes and things like that, they get chewed up, beetles. What's left over is some heavier material that fungi. Judy, is it fungi?
I say fungi.
Fungi. I just keep thinking of the joke, fungi. They further decompose that. So they need that. And so if you want to have that fungally dominated soil, you want to have whole leaves, not shredded up. Because if they're shredded up, there's just so much, the bacteria eats it up before the fungi can get to it. So so definitely a leaf litter. And yeah, and no weeds. I may have the odd dandelion here or there, and I'm like, oh gosh, I have something to go weed to take it out. So for me, my lesson is that the tree, it's a Norway maple, so I'm not like a big fan of it anyway, but it's, it's impacting my sunnier plants, my more fun. I love my shade plants, but the more fun ones are down in the sunnier section. So I'm having to kind of accept that and start to move now to more savanna like plants that can deal with more shade, don't need as much sun, but that's a whole other, whatever. It's just always interesting. Next bullet, Judy. Yep, that goes along with that same theme. Just accept change. If you want to keep something fairly stylized, you're going to have to do kind of a lot of work with maintaining that, which is fine. I mean, some people, that's their thing, or if you hire somebody, that's fine. But I like the flux. I like the change. I like seeing what's happening out there, what's putting itself out there, because you can always move it. If it doesn't work out and I don't like it, I can always move it once it's done blooming. The dog walkers, that was a big one for me. I was like, did not expect that. So have to really be defensive in your planting. So think about that. Again, the litter was another thing that just blew me away. I even had people who would park and they'd be drinking and throwing their bottles out in my garden, in my parkway. And I was like, what? But anyway, I had a little conversation. But so that's something that you want to keep track of. And then you want to care about it. You want to enjoy it, but you have to accept that you don't own it and you can't watch it every minute of the day and people are going to let their dogs walk through it. So even if I get a little annoyed, I have to kind of let it go and just think like, well, there's something about that's very attractive that's pulling the dog in and they like the grass. And so it's all good. Just have to kind of roll with it a little bit. In the sidewalks, yeah, that's important. And kids playing, you have to, I got my kids, neighbor kids, like, oh, I remember one year I was just waiting for my Michigan lily to bloom and something happened to it. It got knocked. And again, it's very heartbreaking, but you gotta go with it. And possibly people who might be digging up your plants, poachers. So something to also, but the thing I really learned too is just that, I don't know, it's something about this parkway. It like brings in a lot of different winged creatures, which is kind of cool. It's my favorite place to go out and observe. There's always something happening. And that's it.